As we go, please feel free to put your questions in the chat, and we hope to have time at the end of the evening to address at least some of your questions. The League of Women Voters believes that every citizen should be protected in the right to vote, and that every person should have access to free public education that provides equal opportunity for all. These two values go together. They are both elements of equal citizenship, hallmarks of our democracy.
It was by Bill Moyers called Children in America's Schools. When Bill Moyers started the documentary, he came to Ohio first. And what he found was that he didn't really have to leave the state to show the inequities that existed across the country. We had them right here in Ohio. And since that time, we've made some significant step forward. Just starting with Governor Taft in 1999, issuing about a little north of $10 billion in bonds to rebuild Ohio schools, and an additional 12 after that. But, with all these steps, there's still more to be done. We still have a school funding system that has been ruled repeatedly unconstitutional. And, I think that everyone here, we are all very encouraged by the work of Representatives Captain Patterson and so many of our treasurers, superintendents, and education experts around the state who have come together to try to fix this once and for all. So I'll give it back over to Susan. Thank you.
So we would not be here tonight, and our state would not be this close to having a meaningful research-based objective plan for making funding fair if it were not for John Patterson, whose name is associated with the Patterson Plan. Representative Patterson was elected to the Ohio legislature in 2013 with one important goal in mind: fixing school funding. He has been patiently working away on this goal ever since. He's a retired high school teacher, and in January of this year became a retired legislator. He is a relentless champion of fairness and capable of bipartisanship. We could not have a better advocate for our system of public education. He will help us understand the journey and the obstacles that lie ahead. Representative Patterson.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Susie. And thanks for being part of this. And Tracy, to your group, my deepest gratitude. Discussions like this are critically important if we're going to climb this mountain for the last time. And tonight, just to frame this, you are going to be hearing from experts, practitioners in the field, and we have a very special guest at the end of this that I'm just thrilled to have spoken with just the other day, and the one whose name bears great historical significance in Ohio school funding history. Rhymes with Duroff, I think, or maybe it is Duroff. At any rate, my name is John Patterson, a former teacher, and I ran for this position in 2012, knowing how deeply impacted my students were with the budget cuts that came as a result of the Great Recession. Now, we all know that there's been four decisions over the last almost 30 years now, and there have been attempts to fix funding. And you'll hear tonight from one of those who made this charge, Steve Dyer, a few years ago. But we lost that momentum in the early part of this last decade. And I just felt it was time to take it up again. In my second term, I was lucky enough to be, or crazy enough to ask for and receive appointment to the Finance Committee. And from there, I asked for an appointment to the subcommittee on primary, secondary education, the funding component of that. And I could tell you, even though I was a lifelong educator, even though I had bargained for my union, that there was so much that I knew I didn't know. And in that my first experience with this subcommittee, there was this guy named Bob Cupp, who was my chair. And we quickly became friends. He taught me an incredible amount that first time together by my third term in office, my second time on the primary secondary subcommittee, I was a ranking member, and then Representative Cupp and I worked tirelessly to move a budget along that, quite frankly, was a challenge because there was no real formula at the time. But we became close allies, dear friends and colleagues, and we embraced together this idea that Ohio's funding formula was unfair, it was not transparent, it wasn't based on anything rational, and we had to fix it. Well, we limped through that budget, but there was an issue that arose in the very next time out that we knew we had to address. There were school districts who were losing money because of power plant closures, and the TPP phase out, tangible personal property tax. And it got so bad that we had to fudge and twist the formula to make it work. We pledged at that time that we would work together to fix this thing. And honoring that pledge, Bob knew this fellow named Jim Betts, who was a retired lobbyist, who needed something to do to keep himself occupied. And this guy is absolutely, you think I may be relentless. Jim is, it takes it to a whole new level, the young kid that he is. At any rate, we hoped, Bob, Speaker Cupp, and my charge to Jim Betts was to find the practitioners, the people who deal with school funding every day of their lives, bring them together, help us to understand, craft legislation that would make a difference for Ohio. And we assembled 16 of the most wonderful, talented, professional people I've found in my entire life, who have tirelessly given so freely of themselves to move this ahead, not for their district, not for the neighbor's district, but for all districts in Ohio and for all children in Ohio. And you will hear from the superstars of this august group, some of them tonight. We can't hear from all of them, sadly, but they were the ones who really taught me, taught Speaker Cupp, and working together collaboratively, hammered out this school funding formula that indeed meets the constitutional test and will propel Ohio forward with our children if we can convince the Senate, quite frankly, to do the right thing and to get this over the top. And I'll stop my pontificating at that point and turn it back over to you, Susie.
Okay, thank you very much, John. So one feature of this plan, and I've heard this enough now that I almost feel like I really understand it, which is really great. One feature of the plan is that that makes it a vast improvement and a true resource for adequate funding is that it is based on a realistic assessment of what it actually costs to educate children. This is known in the lingo as the base cost, the basic amount of money every child should be guaranteed. The state and each school district share responsibility for funding that base cost and for funding other parts of our school of education. The plan also addresses the expenses beyond the basic building block, where additional state investments are really critical to equity. So tonight, Ryan Pendleton and Tom Hosler, who co-led the research team that figured out that base cost, will present on this information. The first presenter, I think, will be Ryan, who is the treasurer and CFO of the Akron Public Schools. He's also an effective tutor on the content of the plan. He'll be followed, I think, by Tom Hosler, who's the superintendent of Perrysburg Schools in Northwest Ohio and shares the Alliance of High Quality Education Association of 65 high-performing school districts. We want to make sure that you have the basic understanding of what's in the bill without getting lost in the weeds.
Thank you, Susie. And yes, you hit the summary perfect. So the half a dozen times that I've presented with you in the league, I think you can take this presentation on the road. So thanks so much to the league, and thanks so much to the Children's Defense Fund for sponsoring tonight. So what we now know is the Fair School Funding Plan, as embedded in House Bill 110 or the budget bill, has had a long history in getting here. So if we move to the next slide, we'll hit these learning objectives for today. For the next 10 to 15 minutes, Tom and I will go through these slides to give the basic overview, but we really do want to hear from these special practitioners tonight and guests about why the time is now. So quickly, we're going to go through the Fair School Funding Plan about how we got here. It is important to tell a quick story, and Tom's going to take that story. We are going to work through the basic components of the formula, and then we want to hit on a few of the changes as we're moving into the Senate's hands. So Tom?
Well, thank you, Ryan. And thank you for allowing us to share our story and appreciate it. So how did we really get here? And that's a great question. And I think a lot of credit goes to Representative Patterson and Speaker Cupp. And I'm not saying that just because they're on the call, although it's nice that Representative Patterson is with us. But in a day where bipartisan differences are really dividing, the state and the national level, we had two legislators that came together and said, we have to figure out a better way to do this. And from that pure desire to do something better came forward this idea of, let's get people from across the state of Ohio, from different school districts, from different areas with different backgrounds, and let's put them together and let's have a conversation about what we need to do. So they assembled this cross section of individuals that were from the field. And I think that sentiment carried through with the other legislators. Representative Bride-Rose Sweeney is with us, and the others that are pictured here. Republican, Democrats, not important, but what is important throughout this whole process is the fact that we are focusing on the child and what's really important to funding them in a way that makes sense for Ohio. So this cross section came together and we began to work. At no time, Ryan and I were partnered together. We didn't know each other ahead of time. We're on the opposite ends of the Ohio Turnpike, literally. And at no time did we stop and say, hey, we need to kind of shift this a little bit this way, because I think the way we're going is going to benefit my district or your district better. At no time we followed the lead of our legislative examples, and we put what was best for Ohio first and came up with this formula without really knowing how it was going to how the results are going to be. And let me tell you, that is scary. So for us to spend this time to go back to our community not knowing exactly how it was going to turn out, but you know what? That was okay, because we were doing the right thing for students in Ohio. So in the next slide, kind of where we began and what caused this frustration, not the current biennium budget, but the one before that. We had school districts. We have a formula in Ohio. Nobody understands how it works. And when we begin to describe how it works to others, their eyes glaze over, they start looking at their watch, they start playing with their pen. Nobody understands how it works. And that makes it really frustrating for the communities that we serve, because we talk about very important issues across the state as it pertains to school funding and children's futures. And so the last biennium budget, 4/5 of the school districts in Ohio were not on the formula. And what that means is districts were either getting not enough money that the formula says they should have gotten, or they're getting more money than the formula says they should have received. 82% of the school districts in Ohio were not on the formula. And if you think that's bad, this current biennium budget, the number is not 82%. It's 100% of the school districts in Ohio are not on the formula. So talk about a broken formula. And it is a Tuesday night, and it's been, we're into the very busy time for school, and we're here excited to talk about a solution to this, about school funding. And that says a lot about what brought us together. So in the next slide, we'll get into a little bit more of the details.
So there's three essential steps to this plan, or we would call any school funding formula, but the special nature of how we've constructed this boils down to three steps. One is the base cost. What does every typical child in every district across the state of Ohio and every district need today to operate? Step two, righting the wrongs of decades with this state and local partnership. And the constitutionality component is deeply entrenched in that step two, and getting it right here. Step three, those additional funds to those students who need it most, we layer on to those above two steps. And as we you can take on to the next slide. We're going to immediately start to move into base cost in the next slide. Tom? Oh, you're on mute, Tom.
Sorry. So this is a very important component to what we had to do. And I want you to think about what goes into a school day for a student. And we think about schools, and I think this is one of the successes that we had as a work group, is that we brought to the table looking at school funding through the eyes of a student. So from literally the crack of dawn when that school bus pulls up and the lights go on and the student hops on the bus, to the time that student logs off on their school issued device, or sending an email to a teacher at midnight. Think of those two things in a school day, and everything that goes on between those has been talked about and considered in this formula. What we receive right now from the state of Ohio is $6,020. Why $6,020? We don't know. We don't know how it got there. And we don't know what how that, so when we talk to people in our communities about this, we have no idea how those dollars are to be spent or allocated or how they came to us. It's just the number. And it's that generation, decade after decade of broken formula, patchworking, trying to fix things on the fly that has led us here. But this whole student concept, I think, is really powerful and unique to Ohio. And what that means to us is we've thought about not only the classroom and that teacher, but what are the other elements that go into giving a student the best chance to be successful? And you think about that the students need safety. When you think about students being secure in the classroom, we think about giving them support. We think about students who are hungry, making sure that they have food. We think about the extracurricular activities, which teach lifelong lessons well beyond graduation. That is an essential part of what we do. And we thought about all of these things. And then we had individuals who dug deep and began to put a price tag in terms of what does it cost to bring these things to every single school district in Ohio. And that's how we began to pull this together. So we've stood on the shoulders of those that have really worked hard before us, and we're grateful for their efforts. And I think that, this unique model today is setting us up to be successful, but it is a plan that focuses on the whole child. I'm cautious about plans that may emerge in the future where people haven't thought about that whole student, who haven't thought about those ingredients that go into making it a unique experience for our Ohio students. So in the next slide, we have a very simple handout that will walk you through. And if you want to explain how schools are funded with this model, the fair school funding model, this is all that you need. And I'll turn it over to Ryan.
Thanks, Tom. Let's build upon that simplicity. That's all that you need in an otherwise impossible to explain formula to our 609 local communities. And that constitutionality charge that you've heard about, it's different to every district in the state of Ohio. So this sets the stage correctly about what every student needs. And you see very quickly, I'd encourage you to focus on the pie graph so you're not getting lost in the spreadsheet. We'll make these slides available to you, but 75% of this base cost are targeted resources directly into funding the student-teacher relationship and the instructional and student supports. Right off the bat, 75% spent there. Another 20% is spent on building leadership and operations. And finally, the 5% is spent on district leadership and accountability. And when Tom and I go out, and Marlin and others in school community go out to talk and engage them, just not in times of need, this is so much easier to engage them. We've looked at national research, best practices within Ohio, and Ohio data to pull this. And as we transition to the next slide, I do want to leave you with this. Even though Rep. Patterson started this journey some 6+ close to 7 years ago, Tom and I have been on this journey for about 3.5. And over that time, there hasn't been substantial changes to this model since the very beginning. And that's really impressive when you think about it's made it this far without major modifications. The next section we're going to talk about is the state and local partnership. And then we'll finish with the categoricals. Remember, this is the step 2. This is the part about understanding a local community's ability to participate. I want to set the stage and turn it over to Tom, but this is where we get the definition wrong in Ohio right now of what wealth is. Wealth is the definition of how much property value you have divided by how much kids. It has no impact on a community's ability to participate. So Tom, why don't you take it from there?
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. In our current formula right now, there's some things that happen that really don't make a great deal of sense. And for example, I'm in a suburban school district in Northwest Ohio. Ryan is in an urban school district in Northeast Ohio. And if agricultural values increase in the state, which we don't have a lot of farmland left in our community, Ryan has very little, if any. And when that happens, we either become more wealthy or more poor in the eyes of the state. And our state funding is affected by that. And that's hard for the average citizen to understand how that happens. So what this formula does is it looks at what is happening inside your boundaries. And based on that, you're getting your state funding, your ability to pay as a local community is determined by what's happening in your boundary. And that's something that we don't have right now. And so that makes it a huge difference for us in terms of our community to generate those dollars. One of the things that has been very powerful about this process is we've begun to understand the challenges that we have across the state. So when Ryan talks about being in an urban district with high poverty, I'm hearing that from him and understanding his challenges. One of our colleagues is a treasurer in a rural community that's very poor, and Claudia Zahler, talks about the challenges they have, which is very different from the challenges that Ryan has with poverty. And then they hear our story where we're a school district that is growing, and we're not getting any state dollars, and we're having to go to our voters 8 times in the last 11 years. And so these things have brought us together to figure out a way to make it something that is predictable so that we know exactly where we're going to be. And when there is a change, we understand it's because of something that we have control over. So this change in the resident income, and we understand how that ties into the formula with roughly 40% based on income, 60% on property values. And that is a very stable way for school districts to be able to plan for the future.
So as we look at the next slide, that's a good place to transition from 1, you saw base cost, 2, this is the recommendation and the power of recognizing a community's ability to participate, that it's no longer just based on property values. And again, it's not a different tax structure. For those of you who are new to this, this is a funding mechanism. But if we look at a resident's income, then we start to right the wrongs over the last few decades about a community's ability to participate, i.e. levies. So will this eliminate levies? No. It is still a state and local partnership in Ohio, but it will help redefine those who have the ability to participate and those who don't, and stretch out the time in between operating levies. The next slide, and as we transition, I think you can go to step 3 is the categoricals. They're listed here. We have 2 more slides to share with you before we turn it back over. Step 1 is that base cost for every child, every typical child in Ohio. Step 2 is that state and local partnership and getting that right. And step 3 are those additional resources. And I think I saw a question pop up in the chat. And here's where these categoricals are so important. Tom and I partnered on base cost, but in each one of these categories, and Marlin can talk to that too, in each one of these categories, a team partnered for over 3 years to get that part of the formula right. On poverty, preschool, gifted, transportation. And I'll leave you with this as you look to the next slide, and Tom can finish this out. If we get transportation wrong, for a 500 square mile district in the state of Ohio, we are in a sense taking resources out of a classroom. That goes for any category, like economically disadvantaged or poverty in preschool. Any one of these we get wrong takes resources out. And I'll turn it over to you, Tom, to wrap us up.
Thanks, Ryan. And unfortunately, we know right now that we have a funding system that is hopelessly broken. And it is impacting the students, whether they're in my zip code or Ryan's zip code, in a negative way. And we know that change is difficult, and we know that people are used to this broken system, and that transition to move to this plan is going to take a lot of effort to push it through. And we're so grateful for the leadership that we had in the House, and now we're in the Senate. And that's really the conversations that we're beginning to have. But this plan brings all those components that make it so important to the students of Ohio in their future. We talked a great deal about numbers here. And there's one number that I want you to keep in mind as we talked about this, because this number is perhaps the most important number, and it's 2034. Right now, today, we are registering students for the graduating class of 2034. Folks, let that sit in. I don't want to know what it's going to be like in 2034. But we owe it to them to get it right. We can't have another generation of students come and go in Ohio with a broken system, and to have another governor, the education governor, make an attempt and fall short. We have the right ingredients here to make this happen. And this is really what we need to do in the future for our students in Ohio. So with that, Ryan, thank you.
We'll turn it back over to you, Susie. We did include in the slide deck all the additional details on the categoricals for those listeners and readers. We'll make that slide available to you. Thanks. Back to you, Susie.
Could you speak to a minute about the direct funding of vouchers in charter schools? Because that's an important part of this plan as well.
Sure. The concept is this, and we think this is really important for clearing a lot of conflict up in Ohio. It's no longer funded by ADM. So those resident students, they're funded through the local public school, and then a deduct is made out of that local public school's books. It's very complicated. Sometimes the formulas don't work. It disadvantages local communities with the amount of information available. So this is a funded where enrolled concept. So those community charters and vouchers are now funded directly by the state, and they're not through a deduct out of the local formula.
It's near and dear to my heart, and I think it drives a lot of inequality and funding problems. So thank you. It's an important addition. So we'll go on to yet another participant in this planning team and design team, Marlin Styles. School funding is broken in many ways and makes it hard for districts to plan for and deliver what they know students need. Our next speaker, Marlin Styles, is superintendent of the Middletown schools. He started in the classroom and now leads his district and is recognized as a top 30 digital trailblazer. He's a passionate advocate for equity, and he'll help us understand why the plan is so important.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you to our host as well and our sponsors. Rep. Patterson, you ready? Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. Excited to be here tonight. I want to start with just a premise that I learned from somebody here recently, and they talk about this premise of in Ohio, we want equal outcomes for all students, basically meaning at the end of the day, when kids walk across the stage, we want kids to be life ready. But in order for that to happen, students need to have equitable access to opportunities to get to the stage. A core piece of that is the school funding formula in the state of Ohio, the broken funding formula. So I want to set that premise right off the bat today as we talk about why this is so important, because if we want equal outcomes for all students, we need to make sure they have equitable access. So to get us excited for today and really generate some excitement around the Fair School Funding Plan, I'm gonna start off by saying kids these days, and you're probably sitting there thinking kids these days, well, what about kids these days? Kids these days all have dreams in life. It is our obligation as adults here in the state of Ohio to provide them with equitable opportunities, to provide them access to make those dreams come true. I'm going to emphasize all students. If we're talking about equity, it's all students should have access. Well, unfortunately, the current funding structure in the state of Ohio only allows for some, not all students, to have those dreams come true. We need to provide them with those opportunities. So with the Fair School Funding Plan, for the first time, you have a funding structure that at its most purest state, celebrates and embraces and values equity for all students, regardless of socioeconomic status, skin color, grasp of language, or even learning abilities. It values equity for all students, and it really embraces the challenge to provide them with the resources and opportunities they need to be successful in the pursuit of their dreams. It's our obligation. So let's imagine, let's have some fun. If the Senate really pushes this through, Governor DeWine embraces this idea of the Fair School Funding Plan and House Bill 110, House Bill 110, it really allows us to really think about the possibilities. So imagine in your school district where you sit right now, imagine every student who's economically disadvantaged, living in poverty at the age of 4, having access to quality preschool. Can you imagine the possibilities those students would have entering kindergarten with a high degree of readiness? Could you imagine if we were able to eliminate the equities, the inequities that students face, specifically our students of color and those living in poverty? Imagine if we're able to eliminate those equity gaps. Imagine how many future engineers the state of Ohio would be able to produce. Imagine a future president could come from the state of Ohio if we're able to address those inequities. Imagine the possibilities of students having access to technology post-pandemic. Access to technology, become digital citizens that allow us to really impact the future workforce here in the state of Ohio. Imagine if every student who was a non-English speaking student, right? English is a second language. Imagine if they had access to the learning inside the classroom and they were able to thrive and really make their dreams come true. So again, I say kids these days, they have dreams. In order for those dreams to come true right now, Ohio is in a position right now. We need to embrace the fact that the Fair School Funding Plan is the solution, no other solution, but the Fair School Funding Plan is the solution to provide those equitable opportunities for all students in the state of Ohio. And it is the solution, the funding solution for our school districts in the state of Ohio to provide long-term planning, to provide access to those opportunities for all of our students. It is the solution for our students, so kids these days can thrive and make their dreams come true. So honored to be a part of the work, but more importantly, I'm super excited about the potential we have with your support, knocking on the doors of our senators to push this across the finish line for our students. Excited to be here tonight. Hashtag equity for all students.
Thanks very much, Marlin. This is the plan. We got the message. Thanks. Katie Johnson is an attorney and deputy director of the Ohio Association of School Business Officials. She's played an active role in mobilizing school administrators and treasurers to advocate for the bill, and will add her perspective on the plan. Katie?
Thank you, Susie, and good evening, everyone. And thank you to the League and the Children's Defense Fund for organizing the event. I'm Katie Johnson, Deputy Executive Director for the Ohio Association of School Business Officials. We represent the public school district treasurers and CFOs that operate our schools around the state. And on behalf of our members, we strongly support the fair, transparent, and understandable school funding formula as outlined in House Bill 1, the Fair School Funding Plan, and we were thrilled to see it incorporated into the budget bill that passed out of the House on April 21st. This time is critical in public education. As Tom Hostler outlined at the beginning, Ohio's school funding system remains broken. With the Fair School Funding Plan, we have the opportunity to make history and support fair school funding for all of our communities, implementing a constitutional system that takes into account what it costs to educate a child and what each district needs to operate effectively. The Fair School Funding Plan is a product of more than 3.5 years of study and analysis by some of the state's most effective educators and school district financial experts. It represents the most comprehensive, needs and fact-driven proposal the state has seen in decades. The fact that school practitioners, including superintendents and treasurers, were part of this process and the development of this formula is what makes it unique. That is something that's been missing from prior efforts and is essential to what made this formula so comprehensive. We've seen the result of this work in the support of school districts from across the state. Even those that don't have a lot to gain are in support of this plan because it is fair and defensible and discernible. We can finally explain school funding to our communities. The plan is now in the Senate. And with the time, energy, and expertise that has gone into the development of this thorough and comprehensive plan, we, each one of us here tonight, we must act. Everyone needs to contact their senator and members of the Senate Finance Committee to encourage the Senate to keep the plan in the budget bill. It may not be perfect, and who knows, the Senate may be able to improve upon it, but the basic principles and concepts must remain. As Tracy said at the beginning of the program, children do not come in pieces, and neither should our budget or our school funding system. Fixing school funding is arguably the most important policy issue we are confronting as a state. We have come so far and we're so close and we cannot rest. So together, we can do this. If everyone here tonight makes a call, if everyone here asks our parents and our education community to make calls, if we reach out to members of our Chamber of Commerce and ask them to make calls, members of the Senate will listen. They need to hear from you. They need to hear the support for this fair, transparent, and understandable formula, and they need to hear requests that it remains in the budget bill. So again, thank you so much for the opportunity to participate this evening and look forward to working with everyone to get this across the finish line.
Thanks very much. I was a cheerleader too. We would not need the Fair School Funding Plan if the legislature had consistently honored its responsibility to provide the resources needed for a high quality education in every school district, for our system of public education. Steve Dyer will put the plan in the context of the state's investment in public education since the Duroff decision in 1997 that called for a fundamental change. He's currently the Director of Government Relations and Communications for the Ohio Education Association. He's a former reporter and state legislator representing Summit and Portage counties, and he's done extensive research on education policy issues and school funding. And when I need to know numbers, he has them. So Steve, please speak.
Thank you, Susie. It's good to, well, not see everybody, but I guess speak with everybody. Go to the next slide. Just to give kind of a background on the Duroff case. This is kind of the basic outline of what the Duroff case stood for. Until a complete systemic overhaul of the system is accomplished, it will continue to be far from thorough and efficient and will shortchange our students. The over-reliance on local property taxes is the fatal flaw that, until rectified, will stand in the way of constitutional compliance. That's from the fourth and final decision in 2002, penned by Justice Alice Roby Resnick. And that basically boils down the charge that was given to the legislature. You have to develop a formula that's rational, and then you have to fund it enough so that you're not so reliant on property taxes to pay for it. That's the bottom line on what the Ohio school funding system needs to do. And on the next slide, you'll see what the what the funding system has actually done. As you can see, in 1975, 63.1% of the total non-human services budget went to primary and secondary education. Today, we are at approximately 57%. So again, we're committing 6% less of the non-human services budget for primary and secondary education than we did in 1975. If you go to the next slide, we'll see what that has meant. What if today's policymakers had the same level of commitment as we did in 75? Well, today we're at 9.7 billion. We'd be at 10.8 billion. That's roughly the cost of the Fair School Funding Plan. And again, this is adjusted for inflation. And what has happened instead shouldn't shock anybody. What has happened, when the Supreme Court dropped jurisdiction over the Duroff case in 2003, never declared it constitutional. We were at approximately $5.9 billion in real property taxes. Today, we're at $9.7 billion. And even if you adjust it for inflation, we're about $1.5, $1.6 billion off. Again, roughly the cost of the Fair School Funding Plan. Next slide. And what's that meant for the average property taxpayer? Well, it's meant about $650 more a year has had to pay for this. Next slide, please. You may think, well, that's always happened. Our property taxes always go up. Well, between 95 and 2005, when the Duroff case was in place, actually, our property taxes went down. The average property taxpayer for a $100,000 home went down about 20 bucks. Now, it's not a ton, but that's certainly in a better direction than what it's been over the last 10 years. And next slide will explain why. This is state and local share of the cost of education since 1981. And what you can see is that this last year, 2020, was the highest local share of education costs that we've had since 1985. So again, come up with a rational formula and rely less on property taxes. Instead, we have no formula and we rely more on property taxes than ever. We also cannot ignore the cost that privatization has had, charters and vouchers has had on school funding over the last several decades. If you see on the next slide, it has been a steady march up the ladder on the cost of charter and voucher payments coming out of the bottom lines of school districts. And as you can see, this year last year we were $1.4 billion. We're going to be at roughly $1.6 billion this year if everything holds true. And what that's meant is that there's less and less revenue for school districts. So as you can see, before the charter and voucher programs, we were pretty well, school districts got all of the K-12 revenue. Now they get significantly less. They get about $1.6 billion less. And why do I say $1.6 billion other than the fact it's $1.6 billion? Well, we go to the next slide, you'll see. What's that difference between what we were paying after Duroff was dropped and what we're paying today in local property taxes? It's about $1.6 billion. Again, it's not rocket science. If the state isn't picking it up, local taxpayers are, or our kids are suffering with fewer resources or fewer opportunities. So that's the thing. Here's the problem with charter schools and why it's so important that the Fair School Funding Plan pays them now directly from the state. Because under this current funding system, a charter school student gets about $8,000 when the money gets transferred out. And that same student in the school district would have gotten about $4,800. So it doesn't take very many students leaving for there to be a significant loss in state revenue, which means you have to plug it with local revenue, which has happened in many districts. And the worst of all is probably Columbus, which you can see on the next slide, where every student in Columbus loses $1,238 a year in state aid simply from charter deductions. That's why it's so important to move it out of this deduction method and do a direct funding system like the Fair School Funding Plan. And finally, and as you can see, charter schools have not really done great. This is a percentage of grades that are A's, B's, or C's. Charters are at the left and school districts on the right. And as you can see, school districts do much better. Vouchers, on the next slide, you can see vouchers are not just an issue in urban districts anymore. They affect every type of district. Every type of district loses significant revenue to vouchers now, and it's only going to grow. So you can see that this is not just a concern anymore for the urban districts, which is what it was sold as in the beginning. The next slide will show you that voucher performance mirrors charters. According to Cincinnati Enquirer, looked at 2 years of performance data, students in 88% of districts that also house voucher providers outperform those voucher students. So again, you're siphoning off additional state revenue that has to be made up with local revenue to go to a program that actually shows deleterious effects upon student performance, not improvement. Including, and this is true in 5 of the 8 major urban districts, which is Akron, Canton, Cincinnati, Cleveland, Columbus, Dayton, Toledo, and Youngstown. So a majority of big 8 urban districts do better. And here's the most pernicious part of vouchers. In 95% of the districts where the money comes from, you are twice as likely to be white when you take a voucher than the district you left. So again, it's also leading to racial segregation. And here's the bottom line on funding and privatization. In 2010, when we had the evidence-based model of school funding, we were the 5th rated state school system in the entire country. Ohio was number 5. We are now in the mid-20s, we're middling. Meanwhile, Wyoming, which has a formula similar to what the Fair School Funding Plan is now number 7, and it actually has crept up to where we were, number 5. So you've seen a complete shift because Wyoming dedicated 10 years of funding schools based on what students needed and committing to doing it even through the recession, and we did not. And that's very, very simple, black and white. So if we want to see in student improvement and student achievement, we're going to do better. And just so in case you hear that we're spending too much on schools or kids get enough money, here's how much, here's the percentage of students that receive greater to or equal to or greater than the national per pupil spending average in 2017. We're below the national average. Pennsylvania, our neighbor, 97% of students have more investment in them than the national per pupil spending average. And Wyoming, which I talked about earlier, it's 100%. So again, it's a matter of commitment, and it's a matter of getting this Fair School Funding Plan in so that we can finally meet that Duroff mandate. And I'll turn it back to you, Susie.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Representative Bride Rose Sweeney, who's kept the torch burning and has carried the bill forward. So we really appreciate her role in that. She represents Cleveland and the southwest part of Cuyahoga County. Please take your turn.
Well, thank you so much, Susie, and thank you so much to the League of Women Voters and to the Ohio's Children Defense Fund for hosting this. And to, of course, everyone else on the call who actually built this plan. And of course, Representative Patterson, who gave me the biggest honor of my life and possibly could be for no matter how long I continue to serve, to be able to carry on this torch and finally, after so many years, get this across the finish line. I'm here to champion and to keep to talk about how we get this through, and that is by everyone on this call. And you're already doing the first step. You guys are engaged, paying attention, and everyone here has to have some reason as to why fixing this dire problem in our state. We can't wait any longer, and we cannot reiterate it enough. This House Bill 1, the Cupp-Patterson plan, we were able to get into the budget bill, and that passed out of the House of Representatives with bipartisan support, and now is in the Senate. And we will keep asking. And for anyone on the Zoom call, in the chat, they have put in the link of actually how you can find who your state senator is. For anyone watching after the Zoom call or on Facebook, you can go to ohiosenate.gov/senators or just ohiosenate.gov, and there's an option on that homepage. I can tell you, as being an elected public official, and being around public officials my entire life, there's a lot that individuals care about, but the one thing they all have in common is that you care about staying elected to get your, policies, your viewpoint across. And the only thing I've ever seen, the General Assembly move on something that they might not have a preposition to want to move is when they feel the heat from their constituents and when they feel that it's going to be noticed. Too often, especially in the state capitol, Congress gets taken up a lot of the, the airwaves and the media attention, and everyone knows who their local government is, but state government is, clearly so important. We fund, things like our schools. But it's really up to us to really make sure that everyone who is going to cast a vote on this knows that people are watching and that there are going to be people who have a viewpoint on which way they vote this up or down. And I can just say, working in legislative office as an aide, and now as my own elected official, the best form of communication is anytime that you can directly communicate with that person. It is still a pandemic, but if you are somebody that can't have an in-person meeting, or even Zoom, and having a face-to-face conversation with that state senator, where they have to look at you in the face and ask, and you don't have to know all the ins and outs of this plan, simply saying, I am a constituent and I'm asking what you think of the Fair School Funding Plan and how do you plan to vote? And if that's not your cup of tea, calls and emails, they absolutely matter. In my office, I can tell you, we chart down for every different issue. Some issues it's pretty clear about where my constituents and my community feels on, but some other issues it really is, this is how many people we got for, and this is how many people we got against. And so when you have those high numbers of calls, it really does put that pressure on you. And of course we have to, social media, and that's, anyone watching on Facebook, please share this video. They, in the chat, there were sample tweets. They put in all of the handles of the senators. Once you find your senator, once you have your meeting, you sent that email, that call, you can, if you simply Google their name, their handle on Twitter, typically it's very easy to find, and tag them and say, hey, Senator so-and-so, are you planning to vote on the Fair School Funding Plan? And what that does, it really creates a system of people who may not be as engaged, of everyone who is willing to spend their Tuesday night on another Zoom call. But, it makes a difference. And why, the people before me have illustrated so well about, how long General Assemblies before us have passed the buck, and the fact that we're at the point that not one school district is on the funding formula, the worst it's ever been, we can no longer wait. And the key here is how important it was that we got this plan into the budget, is that there is a deadline. We have to have a budget, and that deadline for the state to pass our operating budget is July 1st. And so this is the farthest we've ever gotten to having a comprehensive plan get to the mark, and it is in the Senate's hands. And so, it's not going to be easy. Of course, the Senate does have other ideas of what they want, but there are enough people, farthest we've ever gotten to having a comprehensive. Sorry about that. But that there is a chance, there are enough senators in there that have previously voted on this or were co-sponsors in the Senate. But we need to help them have the courage to get this across the finish line. So I appreciate everyone on this call and for finally doing the right thing and the just thing of giving our students what they need. And that is this fair school funding plan. Thank you.
Thanks so much for your work and for your encouragement and direction. Our voices really do matter, and that is what we have to use to get what we need. So in 1991, the Ohio Coalition for Equity and Adequacy of School Funding sued the state of Ohio, challenging the constitutionality of school funding. The lead plaintiff in the historic case that has not yet been resolved, as we've been informed, was a 15-year-old high school freshman at Sheridan High School, Nathan Duroff. We are fortunate that Mr. Duroff, now the parent of a 14-year-old and an 18-year-old and a mortgage loan officer in Newark, is here to complete the circle on this important historic search for adequate and equitable funding. I believe we have a message from his father. Is that correct? That will run first, and then we'll hear from Nathan.
Sorry, just a second, Susan. I'm having some technical difficulties with the video.
Well, I think it'll be worth waiting for. What do you think, Allison?
Just a second more.
Okay.
Apologies.
Good evening.
Can you see that, Susan?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, great.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I am Dale Duroff, the namesake for the 1991 decision by the Supreme Court that said at that time, method of financing of schools was unconstitutional. It's still unconstitutional, but I think the support of House Bill 1, which is what we're here really to discuss a little bit, is in fact the step in the right direction that we've been waiting for. I remember well when the decision was made by the Supreme Court, and talking to a couple of the politicians at that time who were in office, state legislators, who said that they intended to do nothing because unfortunately the Supreme Court at that time, even though they made a ruling that we were in favor of at that time, but that they weren't going to in fact police the correction of the unconstitutionality of the school funding. So the politicians just said, well, we're not going to do anything then. So it didn't do nearly what it should have done. And the progress from 1991 till 20 years later has not been by any means what we would like for it to have been. We're making some headway in facilities, but I think that was an accident as much as anything. Once the Supreme Court did make its decision, some of the politicians decided, well, we'll appease the school boards and school districts a little bit by creating the capital endowment fund, or not endowment fund, but the capital fund rather, to build schools if the local support would support enough of that cost. And I think they were surprised when there were so many schools that in fact did come up with local funds adequate to go ahead with building new buildings. And sure, it's great to have the new facilities, but we've got to be able to operate the facilities, and we've got to continue to improve our educational process, our educational end result, because the future of this country, of this world, is the education of our students today. So we've got to move forward. And I think House Bill 1 is a very good step in that direction. So I would certainly welcome all the support from the League of Women Voters. I appreciate very much everything that you do and the support that you get behind things that you believe in. So we're pleased that you're on the same page, I think, that we are in this endeavor.
Thank you. So, Nathan, your life has affected all of us and inspires us to keep our focus on justice. So please share your final thoughts on fair school funding.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me. I know this has been kind of brought up a little bit, but just from a historical standpoint, it's always kind of interesting to me to look back. You know, I started with the lawsuit in '91. I was 15 at the time and a freshman in high school, and kind of naively, I think, thought, well, by the time I'm a senior in high school, this will all be wrapped up, and hopefully there'll be a new funding plan in place, and generations after me won't have to deal with the same challenges. Graduated in '94. That didn't happen. Had a younger brother that graduated in '96, and kind of the same thing. Thought, well, man, maybe by the time he's out of school, this will be taken care of. And I just kept thinking that, how can state legislatures say, elected officials say no to kids? And 4 times the Supreme Court decided that the school funding plan is unconstitutional, and still nothing's been done. And so 30 years later, I'm now, as you said, I'm 45 years old. I'm married. I have 2 kids. My daughter's 18. She just graduated last year. She was a class of 2020, and still the same funding formula in place then as when I graduated. And it's very bizarre to me to think that, over that 30-year time period, the number's higher than this, but 100,000 kids a year plus go through the Ohio schools every year and graduate. Over 30 years, that's 3 million kids that have been through a broken system, and we can't afford to have another 30 years of the same broken system. And I really urge you to contact your local representatives and urge them to keep this part of the bill and fix school funding once and for all, because Ohio kids deserve better than what they've been given.
Thank you very much. How can we say no to kids and keep saying no?
Right.
I want to thank all of our presenters for adding their perspective and doing the hard work of creating this. And I urge everyone to support the plan. Let your state senator know that you do, and that we cannot wait any longer for all children to have a fair shake at a great public education. So, Tracy, do you have any final thoughts?
I just want to thank everyone who shared, all the years of work that they've been doing to get us to this point, and we're so close. We just need everyone to contact their legislators, contact their representatives or senators, let them know about your support of the Fair School Funding Plan, and also make sure they know that you support this. We know it's not like 100% perfect, And we know that there's, you know, obviously a phase-in that we need to think about and need to work through, but the time is now to do that. Our children have waited long enough. So thank you. And everyone on this call, and we'll be also sharing a link on Facebook of a call to action and different things that people can be doing right now and over the next several weeks to make sure that your voices are being heard. So thank you all and good night.
Thanks for joining us.